we're going to work on our coneflowers. You're going to start by mixing up a puddle of yellow, fairly rich pigment, so a little more pigment, a little less water. And you're going to mix up a puddle of red orange, or just the permanent rose, any red that you happen to have. The one that I'm using, I believe, is Windsor red. And you're going to mix up a puddle of ultramarine blue, or just a darker blue, whatever you might have. The first thing we're going to do is come back in and put a second coat on the centers of our flowers. And we're going to do it the exact same way we did the first one. We'll start with our yellow, pushing out on the left-hand side, come back in and pick up some red, touch that into our yellow. It's okay to leave some openings so you can see the colors that are underneath. And then we'll pick up our blue and we'll lay that down on the right-hand side and a little bit along the bottom. We're laying our colors in with a curve so that we can suggest the shape of our cone. And when you've completed the first one, you can hop on over to the second one. We're just painting right over our first coat. We've got the yellow, some of our red orange, and then some of our blue. If you felt that your cones were too striped looking, this might be the time to just soften all of those colors together a little bit. If you mix red, yellow, and blue, you will get a shade of brown. And the centers of these flowers are brown. But I always love to show the separation of color. You can see the difference between the one on the left where I have softened the colors more together. It's a bit more muted. So I'm going to clean my brush, take out most of the water, and do the same thing on the second blossom. I'm going to start in my yellow area, pushing the red over there. I don't want the whole flower bud to be muddy. And then I'll just work my way across to the right, picking up some of that darker blue and pushing it in. And this will soften all of those colors and make it look a bit more realistic. The next area that we're going to work into are our stems. And your stem, it's fun to just paint it with yellow. I like the fact that the stem is lost and found, weaving its way behind the petals of the second flower. After I've basted in with some yellow, I'm going to take a little bit of blue. I didn't clean my brush out first. And on the shadow side, I'm going to lay the blue right down into that wet yellow. So I'm charging this blue into the yellow. And that helps to establish the direction of light. I'll just take the pigment out of my brush and push some of those colors together. Things that move through space will change in value. So I don't want to push the color all the way on all of it, but at the base I'll darken with a little bit more of that blue, and maybe right under where the petal, the stem goes into the flower, I'll darken it a little bit more there. So that's a quick and easy way to suggest the direction of light, which is something we want to be consistent about. And then on this second stem, I'm going to turn it just a bit more to come up toward the head of the flower. And I'll do the same thing. I've laid in the yellow. And then without cleaning my brush, I'm going to pick up some of the blue, darken where the stem goes out of the paper, darken where the stem comes up under the head of the flower, and then darken along the right-hand side. Don't be afraid to pick your brush up and make that dark a lost and found. That helps to establish the variance in value coming up the stem of the flower. Now, most of you, I'm sure, have completed the petals coming off the head of the flower on the right-hand side, which is going to be our shadow side. But quite often, I'll come in and do those even a third time. So I'm just going to take a minute now. In the areas that are dry, I don't want to paint the stem that's coming or the petal that's coming in front of that stem unless I'm very careful about leaving a dry area, because watercolor pigments will go wherever the paper is wet. But I'm just going to come in here and darken the petals on the shadow side of my flower one more time. And I'm painting the petals with water. I'm letting that water absorb into the paper for a minute or so, and then I'm coming back and dropping in my pigment. I'm painting every other petal if the petals are touching one another. If the petals aren't touching one another, it's okay to paint them directly right beside one another. On the left-hand side, we have a little petal coming off our flower that we can make it create a turn in. I'm just going to make that one shape, and I'll make that the second shape. And to create the effect or the suggestion of a petal turning or folding, I'll just darken the piece that's underneath. Come back and soften that edge. And you can see how that looks like the petal is folding over on itself. You can pump a little more color in right where the fold begins and let that creep down. This petal that's over here, I could suggest a fold on that one as well. Just make it come through that way. Same technique, laying in the color, cleaning my brush, and coming back and softening. Oh, I see another folded one up on the blossom to the right, the most furthest left petal. I'm going to lay my dark right underneath where the petal is folding. And then I'm going to clean my brush, take out the excess water, and soften the color down. I thought it might be fun to try using some dry brushing technique on our coneflower painting. And I've got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that for you. I'm using a relatively small brush to try this, and I'm going to try to suggest grasses. So I'll mix up some yellow and blue on my brush. I'm going to take most of the pigment out, just tapping it onto a paper towel and pushing the color up. I might have taken a little too much out. So if you wanted to add a little bit of foreground or the suggestion of other grasses in where your coneflowers are planted, you could try dry brushing in that area just to practice that technique. The other thing you could do is a little bit of the wet scraping. How about if I just put down a big blob of color and then take my scraping brush and scrape through that nice puddle of paint. Part of it is dragging the color and part of it is scratching into the color. If I get some of the grasses to come up behind the flower, then I'm using overlapping and having a stronger sense of depth in my painting. And we can charge in some darker color. We could take a brush full of pigment and splatter. So this is how I use some of the techniques, excuse me, that we've been learning over the past few weeks or few sessions. Excellent.
Nice. Looks nice.
Have a super day, guys. Keep practicing. Once your painting has dried, you can remove your masking. Thanks for joining me.